That's right, it's flannel season again, and I am going in full swing. That's right, this culture is now my personality. I like IPAs now. My favorite band? Oh, you wouldn't know them. My generation is misunderstood. I use the hashtag, too many hashtags, on the regular. I think that liking the Beatles makes me unique. You subscribing and liking this video is my truth. Don't take that away from me. But it's time to answer the age-old question that everyone asks at some point in their life, which is X a good first car? And by everyone, I mean a small amount of people that care about cars when they start driving cars. Weirdos like me, for instance, who liked cars since I was like -9 months old, probably. I'm pretty sure it's embedded in my DNA. But this particular case being, is a Mustang a good first car? And in particular, because the one that everyone wants is the Mustang GT. Well, I happen to own this Mustang GT, and I can happen to answer that question for you probably, based off of my ownership experience, and also as a person who had a 350Z when I was 16 years old. Now, I am 22 at this point in my life, and I am probably, no offense guys, far less stupid behind the wheel than a lot of people my age are. But I know how it is to be a young dude that wants to drive something fun when he is probably not capable of driving something fun. So let's get into that right now, because I think that ultimately, in this particular order, there are 5 things that a first car needs to be, which is safe, reliable, easy to drive, efficient, and fun. Fun is the 5th most important thing to me. Those other things are far more important. So let's cover all of them individually for the Mustang and basically break down whether or not, by facts and science and actually really just opinions, whether or not this is a good first car. So number 1, with safety in mind. If we're talking about crash test standards, a modern Mustang GT is a fairly safe car. A modern Mustang of any sort. They have good crash standards as long as you have the Takata airbag recall fixed. Like on my car, which they do a mobile fix now. That's how I got mine done, which is convenient. Otherwise, there is a small possibility that metal shrapnel will be launched out of your airbag at Mach 18 and impale you to death, which I would say probably falls under the category of not particularly safe. But otherwise, crash test standards. And obviously, if you get that airbag recall fixed, please get that airbag recall fixed. Then a Mustang is a fairly safe vehicle. Now, we'll kind of break down safety as far as a driving experience a little bit later on, but obviously, when it comes to how stupid you can be behind the wheel in especially a Mustang GT, that is a lot less safe than, you know, you could be in like a 97 Civic, which is ultimately a much less safe car, but it's a car that you're not going to get in nearly as much trouble in, at least not nearly as easily. So we'll get into that later on, and it also should be mentioned that we're not talking only specifically about one generation of Mustang. So really, depending on the year range of the Mustang you're buying, there's going to be a huge swing in safety and how safe they typically are, of course. This Mustang, being a 2011, is going to be fairly safe. But if you get like, you know, a Fox body Mustang, obviously that's not going to be up to modern safety standards, so just keep that in mind. But moving on, another thing that I think that a first car should certainly be is reliable. And Mustangs are typically extremely reliable cars. Yeah, blah, 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 yada, yada. Everyone complains about Ford, and by everyone, I mean people that don't own Fords, complain about Fords and say that they're stupid and the reliability is terrible and whatever. And okay, yeah, sure, there are some that have garbage reliability. 6.4 power stroke immediately comes to mind. I mean, there's plenty of examples of Ford vehicles that have terrible reliability, but for the most part, a lot of them are very good, and ultimately, even when things do fail, for better or for worse, in some ways, there's a ton of parts sharing between Ford vehicles. There's a lot of parts bin stuff in basically every Ford vehicle, which does mean that they might be less exclusive, but it also keeps things cheap. Repairing things on the Mustang, although this is a fairly high performance car as things go, repairs are really inexpensive for the most part. So obviously the cheapness of parts doesn't factor directly into reliability, but I do think that it's important because when things do break, because things can break on literally any vehicle no matter how reliable it is, that is a benefit. Whether you're going to be fixing it yourself or taking it to a shop, the prices of parts is still going to be a benefit to you, especially if you're doing things yourself. But ultimately, this is a very, very reliable car. Pretty much every generation of Mustang is fairly reliable. Almost every powertrain that's ever gone in any of them has been at least fairly reliable, especially in comparison to other fun cars you might be looking into. And in my case, my Mustang has over 100,000 miles on it. I actually don't know how many miles I have right now. 115-ish? I don't know. I don't have it set on the odometer most of the time, but it has to be right around there somewhere. I bought it at like 107. And in the time that I've owned it, I haven't really had any issues. I don't know exactly how this was maintained by previous owners, but I had to replace the alternator, and that's basically been it as far as things that have broken. I have done other maintenance items, either as preventative maintenance or just fixed little things that aren't that big of a deal, but as far as things that actually broke and I had to replace, alternator has been the only thing on this that I can remember so far, and I've owned this car for, it will be a year later this month as I'm filming this at the beginning of November in 2023. So Mustangs are pretty reliable. When it comes to a performance car, these are probably some of the most reliable options you are going to find. So that is definitely a mark for a positive in this case on owning a Mustang, even as a first car. The number 3 thing, where we will get back to safety a little bit, is that I think that a first car should be easy to drive. So not only is a car being easy to drive important for people that are just getting their licenses and just getting on the road for the first time, it's also important because if your car is not fun to drive or is not easy to drive, you don't enjoy driving it, you're not going to want to drive. And that can honestly ruin cars for you. It's the same way to me where, I mean, I also play guitar. That's a huge passion of mine. I love guitar and general music instruments and gear in general. And if you start playing guitar on like the cheapest possible guitar that you can find that's set up terribly, it's not gonna be fun, and you're not gonna want to do it because it's not enjoyable. Now, if you spend a little bit more money and you invest a little bit more in the hobby and get yourself a nice guitar to play, it is going to be far better to learn on and is going to make you enjoy learning the instrument, and having a good time doing it will make you want to pursue it more. You have to enjoy what you're doing in order to continue doing it, or it's just gonna fizzle out. You're not gonna continue doing it if you're not having fun. And cars are kind of the same way. So I know that a lot of people take the approach of like getting their kid a big SUV as like their first vehicle because they think that that's safe, which in a way, yes it is. You might generally fare better in an accident in a large SUV than a smaller car, but modern safety standards, if you're getting them something past like 2005, most vehicles are fairly safe. There's not a wide difference between them in that sort of way. And there's actually other things that can make a big SUV less safe, like the fact that they're harder to fit in tight spaces. I mean, you have to pay more attention while you're driving in a larger vehicle. It's just true, especially in certain cities and especially overseas. I say this as a person in the United States. Our roads are built for big vehicles for the most part. There's not that many places where you can't fit a large vehicle. But a lot of places overseas, and especially in Europe or even in like Asia and Japan, like there's a reason why K cars are such a big thing over in that part of the world as well. Some large vehicles just literally aren't feasible. It would not be enjoyable trying to drive a large vehicle around a town, an establishment that is not made for it. So in that sort of way, that might not be enjoyable. It might make you not want to drive. And there's obviously various other reasons why you might not enjoy driving a certain car, but we'll get back over to the Mustang specifically. Is the Mustang easy to drive? Well, first of all, yes, it's not that hard of a car to drive. If you've never driven a coupe before, especially a coupe with a long hood like this, it takes some getting used to. The visibility to the end of the hood, you just can't tell how close you are to things as easily as you can in like the Focus with a short hood that slopes down really quickly. That is true. Generally, visibility out the back is not super awesome in cars like this either. It's actually not that bad in the Mustang. It's far better than in the Challenger or Camaro of this same year range, same generation. Those little 3/4 windows make a huge difference for visibility, but it's still not as good as like a hatchback or even something like the Focus in a lot of ways. But otherwise, I mean, this is a slightly bigger car than some other cars that you might be considering. So it is maybe not as easy to drive or fit in places as some other cars that you might be looking at, but typically it's not hard to drive. This car is also a manual. If you're wanting a manual, this is also not a difficult manual car to drive. The Mustang is honestly a pretty easy manual to drive. Sorry, Zane, you just suck at it. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I love you, Zane. This was a joke. Here's the definition for that in case you don't know. No, but genuinely, any manual car takes a little bit of getting used to, especially if you haven't driven stick ever, or if you're a little rusty on it. But the Mustang, it's a V8. Even the V6s, I'm assuming, are similar, but especially with the V8s like the GTs, there's plenty of torque, so as long as you don't just drop the clutch, it's really easy to not stall. The clutch is not overly heavy, especially if you don't have the clutch spring mod like I do in my car, and it's just typically not that hard of a car to learn. So I do think that it is easy to drive in that way, but we need to get back over into the safety aspect a little bit because, especially the GTs, even of this generation, this is a car with 400 horsepower at the crank. And for any of you young people that are watching this video, let me explain something to you. I understand that in our current culture with cars that everyone thinks that if it doesn't have 1,000 horsepower, it's not even fast. Everyone thinks that like you have to have so much power, and that something like 400 horsepower seems like that's fine. I mean, like some regular sedans have like 400 horsepower nowadays. A ton of EVs have like more horsepower than that. It's not that big of a deal. You have been desensitized to horsepower, I promise you. I understand that 400 horsepower is not as big of a number as it used to be, but trust me, this is not a slow car. You can get into a very sticky situation incredibly easy with this car. It has a fairly primitive traction control system, which is performance oriented and will let you get away with a lot of things. And especially if you turn traction control off, my car has stickier rubber than stock, and it's 285s, which in the case of this car, which came with factory 19s, it would have been a 245 from factory. So we've got an extra 40 millimeters wider tire with a more aggressive compound. My car is tuned, it has long tube headers, but even so, I will spin all the way through first and all the way through second if I'm driving it super aggressively. This is a car that will bite you if you are stupid. It is not going to save you. It doesn't have super fancy electronic systems that'll keep it from spinning out or something like that. Yes, it does have stability control that might help you somewhat, but if you give it a boot full of throttle, it will do what you told it to. And if you unwittingly told it to spin out into a crowd of people, like a lot of people have done, it will do it. No, it's not 1,000 horsepower Supra, it's not a 1,500 horsepower GTR, but this is not an 109 horsepower Nissan Versa either. This is not a slow car, and if you are stupid, you can and will kill yourself. I just want that to be crystal clear. This is not even the fastest Mustang that you can get at this point. I mean, even when it came out, it wasn't the fastest Mustang ever available, but that doesn't mean it's slow. And with all of the torque that is available in this car, you can screw up so easily if you don't know what you're doing. And I'm sorry, as good of a driver as you might assume you are, maybe you have a racing sim or whatever, maybe you watch tons of people drive, maybe you've looked up all sorts of things about you know, how to be a good driver, and that's great, and I applaud you for that. You're putting in a good effort. You still don't have enough seat time behind the wheel to be that good of a driver when you start. You're still a beginner. You still don't have the like muscle memory built up for when something happens in the car that will help you prevent yourself from getting into an accident. You are a beginner. Please keep that in mind. I'm not trying to gatekeep. I'm not trying to be a jerk or something. Trust me, I totally understand. Like I said, I had a 350Z when I was 16, and generally I was pretty safe in it. Guess what? I still got in an accident in it. And it wasn't even when I was doing something stupid. I rear-ended someone at a stop sign who stopped suddenly when I wasn't expecting it. Okay, I thought that I was a good driver. I thought that I was always careful and paid attention. Something still got me. Something can get you. So please be careful. And please keep in mind, no matter how prepared you think you are, a car this powerful, and yes, this is powerful, is not going to be the best choice because of that reason for a beginner driver. So that's how we come back around to safety, because yes, in the event of a crash, especially one that's unexpected or when someone hits you, it is a fairly safe car. But it is a car that is much easier to get into an unsafe situation with. Alright, the next and number 4 thing that I think that is important in a first car we will discuss regarding the Mustang is efficiency. Yes, those MPGs, the thing that most people don't really consider that heavily before they look at a first car. And some of you might be watching this thinking, of course I've thought of that, Colton, but trust me, it is different when you're at the pump watching those numbers climb, being solely responsible for them every single tank. A lot of people, without even realizing it, have kind of the attitude of like, well, what's the big deal? You sign up for having to pay for gas when you get a car. Boo-hoo. In fact, I even had this conversation with a friend who was a few years older than me at the time, like years ago, and I think he was like annoying me or something that day, and he said something about not wanting to do something because he didn't have gas money and he didn't want to waste the gas in his car. And I was basically like, boo-hoo, you have to pay for gas. Whatever, of course you do, you have a car. And he just looked at me and was like, it's different when you'll have to do it. And guess what? He was right. And believe it or not, I don't remember the rest of that conversation because I don't remember arguments from years ago in incredible detail. I mean, what am I, like a woman or something? I'm just kidding. I love women. I'm married to one, in fact. That was a joke. Here's the definition again in case you didn't read it the first time. But listen, all I'm saying is that miles per gallon matter more than you might even realize, even if you already think that they do. Yes, you might be calculating gas mileage, you might be thinking about how much it costs, but trust me, it's different when you only have $20 and friends ask you if you want to go out to eat, and you get in your car and you see that you have an empty tank. Where's that money gonna go? Efficiency in a car does matter. And the fact of the matter is, this is a horribly inefficient car. It's actually not as bad as a lot of other performance cars are that have V8s or whatever. It certainly could be worse. This car can potentially, supposedly people say, get like 30 mpg on the highway. I've never experienced that. I've gotten maybe 25 on the highway, if I'm lucky. And in general, my average MPG on this car is like 19.5. And it doesn't have that big of a tank either. And, you know, you get not even 300 miles out of a tank most of the time with this car once it's all said and done, or just over 300 miles out of a tank. My car does have a tune on it that might affect things slightly, but still. And you also have to keep in mind that this is a car that, although it can run 87 octane, it can, believe it or not. It's honestly shocking because it's like, this is an 11:1 compression ratio. Not something you would think that would run 87, but apparently it can just retard like timing a lot or something to make up for that. And in case you just got offended by me describing retarding timing, well, look it up, it's a thing. I didn't just use that word for no reason. But ultimately, you really should run premium in this car, and premium is expensive. It comes at a premium. I'm sorry. Now, depending on where you go, if you select the stations you get gas from wisely, then it might not be that much more. Like, for instance, I have a Costco membership, and it's like 30 cents more or something per gallon for premium around here, and it's even 93, not 91, which is convenient. But depending on the stations you go to, premium can be like $1 more than the 87 octane, which is just, I mean, that's a lot. That adds up really quickly over the course of a tank and over the course of several tanks over your ownership of the car. This is just not a very cheap car to run gas mileage wise, and although this isn't in the list of things, it also comes into play for how expensive it is to run this car. If you are a young and especially male individual, you are going to pay an arm and a leg for insurance on this. I'm sorry, your insurance expects you to destroy the car. Because unfortunately, there has been a pattern of young dudes getting behind the wheel and destroying cars like this because they're overconfident. You might not think you're one of those people, but your insurance company certainly has to expect that you will be. So this is just not an efficient car. Even if you want a fun car, there's plenty of options out there for vehicles that get way better gas mileage than this does that are probably just as fun in different ways. Maybe not as fast in a straight line, but just as fun and get way better gas mileage, maybe more under the radar for insurance prices as well. Just keep an eye out and look around for other options if you're at all worried about efficiency. Maybe you're not, maybe you'll budget your money really well, but just keep in mind that this is going to be an expensive car to run purely on the gas alone. And the number 5 important thing for a first car is that it's something fun. We got into this a little bit with the easy to drive segment of this video, but if it's not a vehicle that you enjoy at all, then you just might not enjoy driving, you might not enjoy cars. And if you're watching this video, I assume you at least have an interest in cars. And it would be a shame to squash that interest because you got something that you don't like. Now, I will say, please don't take this as like justification for not being thankful for what you get, especially if your parents or whatever, some sort of legal guardian, buys you your first car. Be thankful for whatever you have and be content with it for the time being. But if you are saving for your own first car, or maybe if this is actually a second car but you're still a young person, whatever, then you want it to be something that you at least like a little bit. And this is an incredibly fun car. In that way, then yes, this is a great choice for anyone that's looking for something fun, something that's fast in a straight line, something that sounds great, something that looks cool, sure. Yes, this is certainly a good car. It's a fun car. If you're looking for a car that's fun and you have your eyes on a Mustang, I'm assuming you've done other research about them than just this video, then hey, it's a fun car. It is. I don't know if that's what you're looking to hear. It is a fun car. There's no getting around that, ultimately. But let's break down all of the points once again and determine once and for all, is the Mustang a good first car? Is the Mustang safe? Well, crash test wise, yes, this is a fairly safe car. It will protect you well in the event of an accident. Is it reliable? Yes, it is a reliable car. This is, reliability wise, I know we discussed this as far as fueling, but is a cheap to run car in the fact that things don't break often, and when they do, they're inexpensive. It's fairly reliable, it's fairly easy to maintain, and it's also a fairly easy car to work on if that's something that you want to learn as well. Is the Mustang easy to drive? Well, is it physically easy to get into the car and drive it? Yes, it's not that hard. Visibility, although not that bad for a muscle car, is not as good as it would be in a car like my wife's Focus right here, or something like that, or even my Dakota, which showed up. My wife was driving that earlier. That obviously has way better visibility as well than the Mustang. A lot of vehicles do, even though this isn't that bad. But on the easy to drive side of this car, being easy to drive at the limits, being easy to drive quickly, being easy to learn in, especially stock, with the stock sort of floaty suspension and suspension components that are not quite as, I guess, as stiff as they should be, that allow more slack than they should, particularly in the rear end. This is a car that can sneak up on you and snap on you very easily at the limits. Not that I would necessarily recommend this for a first car, even though I did get it when I was only 16. A 350Z is way more approachable at the limits than this car is. There's a reason Z cars are used for tons of stuff as entry-level drift cars and entry-level track cars, what have you. They do great at that because they're approachable and they're easy to drive and to understand what they're doing at the limit. That doesn't mean you can't still be stupid. You absolutely can. They absolutely can bite you. But this car is going to do that way more unexpectedly, way more often. I've owned both of them. This car is far more difficult to read at the limit than a Z car or something like that is. If you are a new, young driver, this is not going to be a great car to learn on, in my opinion. There are far better options out there for learning the limits of what you can do as a driver. Not that I recommend doing that on public roads, and learning the limits of the car. Miata, BRZ, cars like that, they seem obvious. I know they're not as fast. In some ways, they might not seem as exciting, especially with a world that's so obsessed with only horsepower. But trust me, those are going to be way better, easier to drive cars for a young person. The number 4 thing we got into is efficiency. Well, this is an inefficient car. It is not good on gas, and it has to take premium gas. Again, you can put 87 octane in it, but don't. You're getting this car more than likely for performance reasons. Don't skimp and put bad gas in it. It's not going to be as fast and it's not going to run as well. It's not going to be as safe as putting gas that this car was ultimately designed for in it. And when you do that, it's going to be expensive. It's not a very efficient car. There's no other way to look at it. It's a 5-liter V8. It's not going to get good gas mileage, and it doesn't. And number 5 is the Mustang fun. Yes, it's absolutely fun. There's no other way that I describe it. But it's just not as approachable as other options. In my opinion, and I know if you clicked on this video, this is not what you're wanting to hear, but the Mustang, especially a Mustang GT of pretty much any generation, but especially a Coyote car, they're just not going to be a good first car. I would heavily recommend you don't get a Mustang GT as a first car. And if you're super sold on a Mustang GT, get an older one that is a little bit more approachable with a little less horsepower that you're not going to kill yourself as likely with. I'm sorry, it's just not a good first car. If you want a sports car, something that's fun, that'll be, like I said a million times, I know I've said it over and over, but it's because it's the perfect word for this, approachable and, you know, just as affordable, if not more, than a lot of Mustangs are. Again, something like a BRZ FRS 86, whatever, Miata, even like a 2-liter Genesis Coupe, more so than this. All of those are going to be a way better place to start than a Mustang GT. I know that this might seem more exciting than some of those options. It's certainly much faster than all of those options. But keep in mind, if the car that you're learning on is like a Toyota Sienna or whatever, a Nissan Altima, or a Ford Focus, this has 160 horsepower. This might be what your family drives, whatever. Even if your family drives like a bigger sedan with like 260 or 300 horsepower, it is not going to be the same, and it will be a huge jump stepping into a car like this. I would much more recommend something between your Volkswagen Jettas, your Nissan Versas of the world, and a Mustang. I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear, but I'd like to keep you safe and responsible as much as I possibly can. But hey, if you decide to take this advice and not get a Mustang GT, keep in mind it's not like you can't look at getting one in the future. I just think that there are far better learning tools than a Mustang GT. There's way better places to start, and hey, take those ways first if you can. And you can, okay? You can. So hopefully this video was helpful to someone out there, and if it was, please consider subscribing to the channel if you would like to see more things that I do to my Mustang GT and content that I make on it. And also, if you enjoyed this video in particular, please consider giving it a like. I really appreciate all the support that we've gotten on the channel recently, and I will see you guys all in the next one.